guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Sam Kitchen. My name is Sam Lin. I am just an ordinary home cook who's really passionate about sustainability and save money by making things at home. Hopefully, by following along my YouTube journey, I can help you guys do the same in your own kitchen as well. This week's recipe is based on a recent viral trend. There's been a craze about seitan or Satan. I don't actually know how to pronounce it, but I'm going to go with seitan. Put the spelling up here so you can do some research yourself as well. Otherwise, it's also down in the title. So what is seitan? Seitan is essentially a ball of gluten that's made out of flour. The springiness of gluten really mimics the meat kind of texture, and then today's recipe I am sort of forming it and shaping it into shredded kind of texture to mimic chicken breast. It's a really fun recipe to make, and the result is actually amazingly good. I've been seeing all these videos popping up on Instagram and YouTube talking about seitan, and I did my own research and found out that like I mentioned previously, it is a ball of gluten. As a fellow sourdough baker, gluten really rings a bell. So I thought the other day I was making some sourdough for home, and I thought, why not just follow the same routine as my sourdough and see what happens, because the whole point of sourdough baking is forming that really strong gluten, really strong structure to be able to capture all of the carbon dioxide that's been released by the yeast. So I follow the same process, and the process is a lot longer than a lot of the seitan recipes that I found online, and then the result was actually amazing. I was able to create like really strong gluten formation within the dough rather than some really tiny and short gluten that kind of just breaks apart. So which really helps with the chicken breast kind of texture. So learning from the sourdough process, and that sort of got me thinking that making seitan would be quite fun, and really keen to show you how that went. And then yeah, keen for you guys to try this at home as well. And let's get cooking.
To make seitan, the ingredients is super simple. To create a high gluten dough, we will be using some baker's flour, which is high in protein. Next, we'll need some water. I'm going to show you a couple of methods to put the dough together, one following my sourdough routine and the lazier version as well. We'll need a bowl to mix the dough in, and as always, we'll be working with a scale to be precise with our recipe. We'll clear up our bench and get started with the dough. To make about 500 grams of seitan, we need 1 kilo of baker's flour. If you're just using plain flour, your yield will be slightly less because of the lower protein content. Following my sourdough recipe, we'll be making a 80% hydration dough, so here we need 800 grams of water. Once water is in, we'll roughly combine the flour and water into a shaggy dough. I've said it so many times, and I'll say it again. Working with a scale allows us to up or down scale our recipe very easily. This dough is an 80% hydration dough, which is a 1 to 0.8 flour to water ratio. You can do 500 grams of flour to 400 grams of water for a smaller portion. I like to use a spatula just to keep my hands clean for now. This process is called autolyse. The purpose is to combine the flour and water so the flour can be evenly hydrated. No kneading is required at this point. It's okay if it's slightly lumpy. Clean off your spatula and we'll get it to rest for about 20 minutes. After 20 minutes is up, we're going to do some mixing and work the dough in. I'm going to show you a method called rhubarb method, which is mimicking the motion of a dough hook. Tilt your bowl a bit and use your hand as a scoop to pull the dough up a little bit. We'll be doing the same motion for about 5 minutes to combine the dough and create the gluten structure. The dough might be a bit sticky to start with. It's perfectly normal, just trust in the process. Once the gluten is developed, the dough will be much easier to work with. Not sure if this is the ASMR you're after, but here you go. You might have some explaining to do with whoever is at home now. I mean, you're welcome. After mixing for about 5 minutes, we want to let the dough rest for about 20 minutes. Scrape off your excess dough on your fingers. It really is not too bad, and it's only going to get better as we build up more gluten. After 20 minutes of rest time, we'll come back and mix the dough again using rhubarb method. You can see the second time round, The dough is now a lot smoother compared to when we first started, so this really is a good sign. And as you can see, the dough is barely sticking now. Mix it for about 5 minutes and we'll let it rest for another 20 minutes. Once 20 minutes is up, we're back to the dough to build up more gluten. Prepare a bowl of water on the side to dip your hands in to prevent some sticky fingers. We'll use this method called stretch and fold to build up more gluten in the dough. Start from one edge and pull it upwards to stretch it as high as you can and then fold the dough over. Rotate the bowl 90 degrees and do the same until 4 corners are stretched and folded. Lift the dough up a couple of times to create some tension on the surface. We want to do 4 sets of stretch and folds, and then in between sets, we'll rest the dough for 15 to 20 minutes. Once all 4 sets are done, we can pinch one corner of the dough up to see if we can stretch the dough super thin that it's semi-transparent without tearing. This is called gluten window and is the best way to tell gluten strengths. If your dough breaks when you stretch it, add another set or 2 of stretch and fold to build out more strength in the dough. Once we get to the ideal strength, we want to cover the dough with some cold water and rest for 20 minutes to an hour. If you can't be bothered to do all of the stretch and folds, make up a 60% hydration dough and just knead it for 5 to 10 minutes to build up your gluten. It won't be as good as the sourdough method, but it does save a lot of time. After the dough is well rested, we want to wash away the starch in the dough and leave the gluten behind. Get your hands in the water and literally just wash it. The water you're washing the dough in should start to get cloudy and your dough should slowly decrease in size. You should be changing your water for about 3 to 4 times until the water is relatively clear. Save the starchy water. I'll put a couple of links on how you can use the starchy water in recipes down in the description section. Rinse and repeat the process. Your dough should start look like what's shown on the screen. The starch gets washed away and leaving the gluten structure behind. The end product should look like this with some very obvious gluten structure. I weighed the dough out of curiosity and found that 1 kilo of flour leaves us about 500 grams of gluten. Put the dough on the bench and we want to stretch it out a bit. At this stage, the gluten should be quite springy and should bounce back if you pull it. The texture has completely transformed from the flour dough. Spread the dough out a bit and we want to let it rest for another 20 minutes. After the dough is well rested, we can add some seasoning to it. Here, I'm adding a little bit of garlic powder and just a pinch of salt. Next, we want to cut up the dough and bread it to create a chicken-like kind of texture. Grab a knife or a dough scraper. Leave the top end of the dough attached and cut the dough into 3 strips. Fold in the seasoning and braid the dough. It's a layering that we're creating now that will give the seitan a good chicken-like kind of texture. Tie a couple of knots into the braid to add more texture to it. And that's our fake meat in the raw form. To cook it, I'm using my pressure cooker to speed things up a bit. Normal pot should work just fine, but will take a little bit longer to cook. Water in, seitan in. I'm adding some soy sauce to give it some umami kick. Everything is better with soy sauce, right? Some sugar in, and we want to cook the seitan for about 10 minutes in the pressure cooker or 45 minutes in a normal pot. Once all is cooked, you can eat it as it is, or we can leave it in its own broth overnight and let the flavor soak in even more. Here's my multiple attempts trying to find the right container for it. Put a lid on, and I let it sit in the fridge overnight. I tear up some seitan and use it as shredded chicken substitute for my lunch. I'm pretty impressed with the texture, the bread and knots it's able to produce. I'm able to pull the layers off and turn it into some pulled chicken. Just look at the texture. Oh my. For lunch, I cooked up some of my homemade noodles. If you haven't checked out my noodles recipe, the link is up in the top right corner. Put a pan on medium heat, oil in, seitan in, give it a good stir, garlic in, and let it caramelize a bit to put on some nice color. Don't forget to salt and pepper to season it. To dish up, noodles in, seitan in, a dash of soy sauce. Everything is better with soy sauce. Chili in, and top with some cabbage slaw. The cost breakdown is as below. 1 kilo of baker's flour at $1.25 a kilo equals to $1.25. 20 grams of soy sauce is about 5 cents. Sprinkle of homemade garlic powder is about 1 cent. Altogether, 500 grams of seitan costs about $1.31 to make.
Alright, and there we have it. That's our seitan. In my honest opinion, I think it takes a lot of effort to make, and the wastage is a little bit high, even though we can still use the starchy water for other recipes. 1 kilo of baker's flour yields us about 500 grams of seitan. And let's have a taste here, see what it tastes like. It's got a really nice texture, the really good springiness that the gluten provides. It takes some really good flavor, whatever seasoning that you put to it, and then it also browns really well actually, which really amplifies, really helps with the flavor. In my honest opinion, as a meat eater, does it taste like meat? I don't think so. It probably takes some more flavor comparing to actual meat. So I will probably use it for like teriyaki chicken or any other saucy meat as an alternative, and then it really just absorbs the flavor into the seitan itself. As a meat eater, I'm really happy with it being as an alternative. To be honest, comparing to meat, it's a little bit cheaper actually. So think about it, if it's 500 grams, it costs us about just under $2. 1 kilo, that's less than $4. That's cheaper than any meat that you can find on the market. So I would say it's a fair bit of effort to make, but it is cheaper compared to any meat that you can get. And then as an alternative, I think it's pretty good. Does it taste like meat? Not really. It was worth a try. I'm actually keen to make more in the future and then see what I can turn it into. If you're still watching at this point, thank you very much. If you liked the video, give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I put out new video on a weekly basis, and thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.